It's election season here in Ontario, and today I'm in Toronto, right between two provincial ridings, the ridings of Davenport and Toronto-St. Paul's. 4 years ago, these ridings had very different stories on election night. Davenport was won by the NDP with over 60% of the popular vote, while Toronto-St. Paul was only won by 36% of the popular vote, again by the NDP. Who drew this border between neighbourhoods, a line that influenced their results? Who designs our ridings here in Canada? What processes influence that decision-making? And is that process fair and nonpartisan? Since the 90s, with the passage of the Fewer Politicians Act, yes, actually, Ontario has essentially just copied the federal riding map for its own provincial map. And if you look at these two maps side by side, this becomes pretty clear pretty quickly. So, to discuss Ontario's provincial ridings, we need to discuss the federal system of riding creation. Canada goes through a riding redistricting process every 10 years, based on the results of the most recent census. A relatively proportional number of MPs are then apportioned to every province and territory based on their total population and some other factors. For example, in the 2012 redistricting process, Ontario, with its 12.8 million people, was allocated 121 seats in the House of Commons, while Manitoba, with 1.2 million people, was allocated just 14. This reapportionment is done by Elections Canada, a non-partisan government agency. Once each province has been allocated its number of seats, the designing and location of the ridings is made the responsibility of special electoral boundary commissions. Each province has a commission, and they are the ones who draw the lines between districts. Each commission is headed by 3 people who are theoretically non-partisan. The Chief Justice of every province picks a local judge to chair the commission as its leader, and the other 2 members are appointed by the Speaker of the House of Commons, and tend to be high-profile experts such as political scientists, lawyers, and legislative clerks, and academics. Overall, this early stage of the process is pretty non-partisan, with the slight exception of how they include the Speaker of the House in the process. Now, let's dive into how they draw the ridings. Once every province has been allocated their new number of MPs, the Electoral Boundary Commission of each province can create an electoral quota. Think of an electoral quota as a guideline for the population of each riding, and it is essentially the total population of the province divided by the number of ridings allotted to them. For example, Ontario's population in the 2011 census was about 12.8 million people, and it was assigned to 121 seats, and so its quota was around 100,000 people per riding. The commissions are generally given a plus or minus 25% around the electoral quota when making ridings, which allows them to make some less populous or more populous ridings when deemed necessary. Now, why would ridings diverge from the electoral quota like that? Well, the quota is more of a guideline than a hard and fast requirement, because ridings are designed to accommodate 2 main issues: geography and communities of interest. Put simply, that somewhat flexible electoral quota allows ridings to be designed to accommodate, let's say, difficulties of the geographic nature. Some are pretty straightforward, like the riding of Labrador. It's got a population much lower than its provincial electoral quota, but it's also separated from the rest of its province by water, so it gets to be riding despite its low population. This strategy is also used for many remote rural ridings or ridings in the north. Here, ridings are made with strategically lower populations to better facilitate the work of their MP and the lives of citizens and bureaucrats. Because when you already have rural ridings the size of all the Atlantic provinces combined, do you really want to make them even bigger? The second big issue that commissions must consider are what are called communities of interest. Essentially, the commission tries to protect the representation and interests of a myriad of local communities and groups when designing ridings. In doing so, they consider communities with linguistic minorities, large ethnic or racial communities, religious communities, communities with shared interests in occupation, etc. The definitions and goals surrounding this issue are a bit fuzzy, but broadly speaking, ridings are designed so that they minimize harm and maximize representation for different groups. For example, a big goal when designing ridings is to ensure that First Nations reserves don't get split between ridings, as such a division would diminish the voting power of that Indigenous community between multiple ridings. In considering these 2 big issues, electoral boundary commissions take years to carefully draw lines, conduct public hearings with locals, examine citizen submissions, take in parliamentary recommendations, and consult with local leaders and officials. All of these groups and more influence the decisions of the committees, but at the end of the day, the final lines are drawn by the electoral commissions themselves. That's where the buck stops. For example, here at the University of Toronto, local residents urged their electoral boundary commission to not divide the campus between multiple ridings, and the commission listened, creating the riding of University of Rosedale. So when designing ridings, commissions address these factors along with others like city limits, political boundaries, and community history, and then they draw out ridings using census data, professional skill, and tools like GIS. Now, because you're a smart cookie, I'm sure you've realized that there are some disproportionate elements in this whole structure. First off, creating rural ridings with strategically lower populations does increase the voting power of rural residents, and by extension, gives a slight advantage to more conservative parties. Another bias is towards Atlantic Canada, and especially Prince Edward Island. Provinces cannot have fewer ridings than they have senators, so even though PEI would probably only have one MP normally, because they have 4 senators, they also get 4 MPs who represent very few people, which in recent elections has given a political advantage to the federal Liberal Party. However, broadly speaking, Canada does not have a modern gerrymandering problem. Gerrymandering may be a very hard thing to prove, but Canadian ridings are not intentionally designed to exclude or to maximize partisan gain like in America. All the decisions in federal ridings are done by independent commissions, as we've mentioned. There is very little intensive litigation over redistricting, and parties don't fight over redistricting. But there are still some questionable activities. Just this year, the federal Liberals and NDP have sworn to protect Quebec from losing a seat in the House of Commons that Elections Canada planned on removing, preserving Quebec's political weight from a slight reduction. Altogether, ridings in Canada and Ontario are drawn by independent commissions on the advice and recommendations of locals, influential groups, parliamentarians, and experts. And in doing so, they consider geographic, communal, and demographic data to make decisions about fair ridings and representation. It's nonpartisan, but not perfect. And there are still some questionable behaviors and biases we should at the very minimum recognize and understand. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more loving videos about Canadian issues. Have a good one.